Hi, I'm Alex Roman, Executive Editor for Metro Magazine, and welcome back to METROspectives. Today, my guests are Transit Evangelist Paul Comfort and WSP USA's Davey Kim. Today, the guys join me to discuss Paul's new book, The New Future of Public Transportation, as well as Davey's chapter in on the future of public transit funding. This is a great talk. Both of these guys got a ton of experience. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in. Well, thanks for joining me today, guys. How's it going?
Excellent.
Doing great. Thanks, Alex.
Good, good. So we're here on the occasion of another Paul Comfort book. Paul, can you talk a little bit about the book you have coming up and what you tried to capture in this one?
Boom, baby. 6 books in 6 years. Yeah. And thanks to guys like Davey Kim. This one is back to #1 on Amazon. So very happy about that. Basically, the idea behind all my books, Alex, and this one in particular, is I like to highlight trends in the industry and talk to the most experienced and people with the most expertise in the industry about it. So that's what this book is. I'd written a book called The Future of Public Transportation that was published, if people will remember back, it was published in March of 2020, the month that the pandemic hit the country. And so much has changed since then for public transportation that SAE, the publisher, Society of Automotive Engineers, reached out to me about 9 months ago and said, Paul, we loved your first book. We'd like to publish one for you now on what the new topics are. I mean, 5 years ago, you didn't hear about every month a transit system having a cyber attack where they were hacked and had to have, with ransomware and that kind of stuff. 5 years ago, you weren't even thinking about how AI was going to impact public transportation. 5 years ago, we weren't thinking about new ways to fund public transportation, such as Davey's going to talk about today. There's so many new things that have happened. So that's what the book is. 30 chapters broken into 5 categories. One category is all about people. The next is about what our modal futures are going to be, what autonomous vehicles, what's integrated mobility, what's the future of paratransit, what's the future of mobility as a service. That's a term that's kind of fallen off in its usage in our industry, but it still is active. What's the future of zero emission fuels? There's another one, right? Nobody was talking about hydrogen fuel 4 or 5 years ago. Now it's the hottest topic, literally it's explosive, like they say in the industry. And then data, funding, and faring, which is what Davies is, and then geographic future. So it's a great way to look at what's happening around the world with a focus on the United States. I would say most of the chapters are focused in North America, but we have chapters from all around to say what is happening right now. And the last thing I want to mention about the way it works is there's 30 chapters about 30 different topics, like I mentioned. You don't necessarily need to read this straight through like a novel. My suggestion to people is look at the table of contents and find the 5 or 6 chapters in areas that you might be interested in. For instance, Mohammed Mezgani takes a look at the global view of public transportation. He's the head of UITP. Dr. Karen Philbrick talks about workforce shortages. So you may grab a chapter about something that interests you, or maybe you're looking at your transportation trust fund in your state and you're like, crap, it's going dry because we're only relying on gas tax. Well, then you need to read the chapter that Davey Kim wrote about some new ways we're funding transit.
Right. And I think both of you have been in the transit and public transportation industry for quite some time. And you mentioned, I mean, a lot has changed in 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Can you talk a little bit, both of you, maybe Davey could start with how much transit has changed in 5 years and what are some of the reasons? Because we're used to kind of a slow going with people not really quick to grasp on to technology and really take leaps. What's changed and what do you think are some of the reasons for that?
Well, I guess the first and most obvious one would be something along the lines of ridership changes due to the pandemic, due to work from home, teleworking, flexible work schedules. And so transit agencies are having to completely redesign their service models and operations and rely less on the traditional morning and PM commute and offer service at different times of the day and on weekends, and really try to make it more of not so much of a commuter system, but a system that can meet the needs of everybody. And so we're seeing those changes in a way that did not exist prior to the pandemic. There are so many changes, but clearly this is a different transit space than what it was 5 years ago. And just really quickly on Paul's book, I can't wait to read all of these chapters, 30 of them. Well, 29. I don't need to read my own chapter, but 29
Remember what you
chapters.
wrote, huh?
Yeah, 29 really interesting, fascinating topics, and such important areas that we need to better understand. I'm especially interested in reading about the role of AI in transit operations and service, high-speed rail, bus rapid transit, zero-emission bus, workforce development challenges. All of those and so many others are so important. And so I'm really excited to dive into all those chapters and learn from our peers.
Right. And Paul, what do you think's changed? I mean, I'm sure 10 years ago you would have heard AI and been like, yeah, get out of here with that. What do you think has changed kind of the, transit taking on innovation a little bit more and being a little more forward in that?
Yeah. You know, this is maybe a little esoteric, but I really think what's changed is we're in a different environment today than we were 4 or 5 years ago as a society. The pandemic was a gut punch to public transit, but also to society as a whole. So we've seen all kinds of societal problems spill over into public transportation in a way they haven't before, such as crime and people experiencing homelessness, that now have become issues that public transit leaders are grappling with and trying to figure out what's the best way to approach this. I want to be, humane, but we also we also have to run we have to make the buses run on time, as they say, or the trains run on time. So this whole environment, while keeping in mind the subject of my chapter, that really the heart that all of us need to be operating from is a heart of compassion. I love the quote from Martin Luther King, who said, "Everybody can be great, and everybody can be great because anybody can serve." And I just think that's so good, and that really what we're about in public transportation has not changed. We are about service, service to people who maybe can afford another way, but we want them to get off the road and have less congestion. Service to people with disabilities who maybe have no other way to get where they're going, or service to my grandmother who may, just not be sure about driving at night anymore and wants to take public mobility. So we need to always remember what is at the core has not changed, which is service to others motivated by compassion. And then how do we all these different things that Davey just mentioned, all these new technologies, how do we put them in service of our core mission?
Great. And Davey, let's get into Davey's chapter on your book. I know that it's a big one as far as public transit. I think we're solving the innovation, we're finding new ways to move passengers, to build transportation systems. Public transit itself, though, is funded by the Highway Trust Fund, and we all know about the issues with that. So can you talk a little bit about your chapter and how you delved into that subject?
Sure. Well, let me start with a really high level comment and then we'll get into the chapter.
Great.
At a high level, and you can ask any transit agency executive, funding for transit is a perennial and annual slog. It is a challenge. Paul, I'm sure you felt like a professional fundraiser when you were running the agency. Pass around the tin cup, scrape enough dollars to keep your operations and systems and services running, not to mention capital improvements. It's a real challenge. And quite frankly, and I'm going to be candid here, transit is oftentimes seen by many policymakers as a stepchild or second-class citizen relative to other modes of transportation, highways and roads in particular. And there are exceptions, of course, but that is oftentimes the case. And so from a pure political standpoint, transit does not compete at the same level as highways and roads. Not a reflection of transit. It's a reflection of priorities among policymakers. Now, on the chapter itself, I talk about the looming crisis, and that is facing the gas tax at the federal level, but also at the state level too. The gas tax is dying a slow death. Its days are numbered, and everyone knows that. It's no secret. And it's time to pivot away from the gas tax and to something different. And a lot of states have been doing pilot programs looking at a road usage charge or mileage-based user fee, where you pay by the mile instead of per gallon when you fill up your car. And so many states have been doing pilot programs. The federal government is about to do a national pilot, as they are required to do under the infrastructure law. They haven't done it yet, but they will, probably in the next couple of years. And that will demonstrate at a very large scale the viability of a road usage charge. And that's going to be a really important test. Now, to be sure, transitioning from the gas tax, which has been the revenue method for literally 100 years, to something new will not be easy. It will come with a lot of pain. There are public acceptance questions. There is the question of political viability, political support, or maybe lack thereof. And change is just plain hard for most people. We're wired, humans are wired to maintain the status quo. We humans do not like change. And so this is going to be a painful change, but it must happen because everyone knows, it's no secret, that the gas tax is pretty much dead. Every year, gas tax revenues go down and down and down. And that's no way to run a transportation system, whether you're on the highway or roadside or transit side or anywhere else. So what I say in the book is that if you care about the future of transit funding, you better keep a close eye on the federal gas tax and what's going to happen and what will eventually replace it, because the Highway Trust Fund has been an important source of funding for highways and transit. That's gonna be a big test in the years to come.
Right.
And Alex, as you haven't mentioned it yet, but I'm sure you did it in the opening. Both Davey and I led statewide agencies. Davey was basically the Secretary of Transportation for the state of California, and I was head of the Maryland Transit Administration. And we both relied on our state transportation funding trust funds. And so, like, for instance, in Maryland, where I'm at, it was the gas tax, it was corporate income tax, it was MVA, Motor Vehicle Administration fees that all went into this. And there were some other fees that went into it as well. But the reason that it's going down is actually a positive. The positive is that cars are getting better and better mileage. Cars are getting 30, 35 miles to the gallon, whereas we remember, Davey and I remember, maybe you do, Alex, back in the days when, a big 8-cylinder car might get 12 miles to the gallon or 15, and those days are no more. And so people don't have to fill up as much. Plus, add on to that, the people that are getting electric cars who aren't getting any gas. And it's not really fair for people for them not to pay anything for the roads and for transit, and everybody else has to. So it's really a fairness and an equity issue as we look at how to transition. I think the one thing that people are going to be scared about is, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Davey, is that, we don't want to get taxed twice. We don't want to have gas tax and a road charge. And I think some people are afraid that, once the government gets their hands in something, it's going to be very hard for them to get it out. And so how are people addressing that, Davey? Not to take your job, Alex, but
no, that's a good question. Especially here in California, I think people, we voted in for some of these gas taxes, and now we're paying $5, close to $5 regularly. And people are like, hey, when did I agree to pay for this? And, in fact, we did. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so we have a messaging challenge. And here's a funny anecdote. When I was transportation secretary in California, there was a legislative hearing on transportation funding. And a legislator who shall remain unnamed basically said, I cannot believe the state of California is looking at enacting a road usage charge. We already pay so much in gas tax. This amounts to double taxation. What the legislator didn't realize is that a road usage charge would eventually replace the gas tax. So it is not a case of double taxation. But if a legislator believes that's the case, that will also be true with the general public. Right. And so we have a lot of educating to do. The messaging is very complicated, especially when you layer on top of that congestion pricing, toll roads, and all of those things. Pricing in general is very complicated. Bridge tolls. People feel like they're paying way too much. And so we have to come up with a better, more simple way to explain why it is people are paying or will pay all these different fees, and what is it going for, and how do they benefit from it? What's in it for them? So that's our collective messaging challenge: how to make it easier to digest and understand.
Right. I'm curious because we've talked about with Metro, we've talked about this quite a bit over the years. Talked to Jeff Booth about the Highway Trust Fund and just that there's no solutions. But there's also been a reticence by politicians to raise the gas tax or to make any kind of changes to that. What's the climate in Capitol Hill and in state houses to actually take on some of these ideas and move forward to find a solution?
Well, on Capitol Hill, there is no more talk of raising the gas tax. That is dead. There were efforts in recent years, I would say the past 10 or 20 years, to increase the gas tax. Lack of political support, too politically controversial. Now that issue is off the table. That's not being talked about anymore. Now, at the state level, some states have indeed raised the gas tax in recent years, California being one of them, and many others too, including states led by Republican governors and Republican state legislatures. But even that will not be enough. In fact, in California, the Legislative Analyst Office has estimated that gas tax receipts in California will go down dramatically in the next decade or so, even with that gas tax increase that was enacted less than 10 years ago. It simply does not pay for everything the state needs. So you've got that at the state level. Yeah, at the federal level, there is no more talk of trying to increase the gas tax. It's politically a non-starter and it's dead. And everyone understands it does not have a future and it's time to move away from the gas tax and to try a different revenue mechanism.
Yeah.
And Alex, here in Maryland, there's a task force formed by the governor and the legislature that includes a lot of them that is looking at the exact same thing Davey's talking about is because remember, it's not just paying for public transportation, it's also paying for roads and highways and a lot of other infrastructure projects, bridges, et cetera. And so as that trust fund continues to dwindle because people are driving less, and in addition, it's the hybrid work schedule, right? People aren't driving into work 5 days a week anymore. They're working sometimes 2 or 3 days at home. So all these factors are leading to less and less funds going into it. So a lot of states and localities are doing what Davey's talking about at a national and state level.
Yeah. And I guess I'm just curious that the politicians' willingness to move forward with solutions. I mean, this is really, it could be a hot button issue in getting voted in or out. So I'm just curious on where we are progressively or not in kind of adapting these changes and seeing that, something really does have to change.
Well, I think there's a greater awareness at the state level among state legislatures and governors to tackle this and to recognize and acknowledge publicly that we have a problem. Our transportation revenues are dwindling. We better do something about it and identify alternatives. And so the task force Paul mentioned in Maryland is also happening in other places around the country. And that's why you're seeing more and more states experimenting with road usage charge demonstration programs, pilot programs. And so we're seeing a greater willingness on the part of states, even red states, to doing this. And so all of those state experiments will feed into ultimately the national pilot that US DOT will take on in the years ahead. And so it's pretty exciting to see what states are doing and their willingness to tackle this head on because they recognize there's a problem and they should not ignore it. They have to get ahead of the curve, acknowledge the problem, and come up with some potential solutions.
Yeah. What kind of time frame are we talking about as far as federally and needing to get something done? And when do you think that we can probably see something actually come to fruition?
That's a great question, and I don't know that anyone really has the answer. Let's start with this national pilot. That will be a really important test of scalability, where every state will be expected to include participants on a voluntary basis. And there will need to be a lot of coordination between the Treasury Department and US DOT in terms of collection. And without getting into the technical details, there is so much to iron out. And so it could be a while before there is a full-scale pivot from the federal gas tax to a federal RUC system. It could be a long time, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, who knows? But it's going to be a transition, and it's going to be a complicated one at that.
Yeah. And both of you have mentioned kind of states taking on this kind of, I'm not gonna say burden, but this challenge of changing things. Are we talking about any states in particular that we've seen positive results, or have seen something that is positive toward maybe being adopted on a federal level?
Yes, and I'd like to call attention to a couple of red states that are really seen as pioneers in the world of RUC. They are Utah and Oklahoma. Not progressive states by any means, but I love what Carlos Braceras talks about a lot. He's the director of Utah DOT. He's asked this question all the time. You represent a conservative state, and a road usage charge is a form of taxation which goes against conservative principles. And a road usage charge requires the tracking of people's mileage, which could be seen as an invasion of privacy, which is a violation of conservative principles. Why are you doing this? And I love his answer. He said, well, we believe in the user pays principle. If you benefit from the system, you pay for it. And we also believe in pay as you go. We have so many transportation investment needs in Utah. We're a growing state, and we're not going to burden future generations with debt and other expenses. We have to, if we want something, we're going to pay for it now, and we're going to find a way to pay for it now. That's a conservative principle, and that's why we're doing it. I love that answer.
Yeah.
Because it shows that no matter what kind of state you are, politically speaking, conservative, liberal, moderate, there's a rationale for doing this system. It's not about double taxation. It's not about socking people with additional fees. It's about paying for what's needed in order to keep up with needs now and into the future. And Oklahoma is doing the same thing. And Oklahoma has a really interesting situation where they have a huge network of toll roads. And so Oklahoma DOT very much believes that because they have a long-standing history when it comes to toll roads, their citizens are a little more open to the idea of road usage charge because they've been paying for the privilege of using toll roads for so long. So it's not so much of a foreign concept to them. They sort of understand it. And so they're getting their arms around the idea of road usage charge in addition to toll roads. And again, another conservative state willing to really lead the way when it comes to pricing systems.
Yeah. It seems that there's going to be some kind of a chasm in between finding a solution and implementing that solution. So Paul, I mean, from an industry perspective, what can public transit do to kind of keep funding going? And is there is there a possibility that the current funding that we experienced through the Biden administration can carry on, at a bipartisan level, whether we get a new president this year or not?
Sure. So I'll unpack that a little bit. Answer the last part first. The answer is no. Do not expect any more extraordinary federal funding for operating dollars coming out of Washington. Would you agree with me, Davey?
Absolutely. Yes.
Look at what Randy has to do at WMATA, Washington Metro, right? Randy Clark, where he has to go around because there's no dedicated funding source. There's no, millage on sales tax or property tax in the Washington, D.C. area. So he's got to go every year, hat in hand, as Davey said, to the Maryland legislature, to the Virginia legislature, to the D.C. City Council, and the federal government. This four-part funding source. I mean, he spends his time basically, I don't want to say a professional fundraiser because he's doing a lot more than that. He's leading one of the most dramatic recoveries from COVID of any major transit system in the country. But he's having to spend way too much time on trying to, get these folks to pony up money every year out of their general fund. So the fiscal cliff is here. The fiscal cliff is real. We have been subsidized with operating dollars from Washington at a very high level for the last 3 years, which we're very thankful for. But now we have to come off an off-ramp onto that. And the things that Davey's talking about are just one of many solutions that transit agencies and governments are looking at is how can I continue to operate, keep the fares low enough so that everyone can afford it, right? Commuter trains, commuter services in past have had 50, 60% fare box recovery, but their ridership is down dramatically too. And so it's a real issue. And then you combine it up with the issues we're having with our OEMs, the equipment manufacturers, where a year ago we had 5 bus manufacturers. Now we're down to 2 or 3, depending on if you count the third one as full operational. And we are in a storm in public transit. And what we need is strong, consistent leadership, visionary leadership to help us kind of navigate what comes next. And that's what this book is about. It's chapters from 30 of the world's top leaders helping us to navigate things like road usage charging and and some of the concepts are so new that people may not have even heard of them before. So it's an opportunity for them to get acclimated to these new ideas and get some understanding about them.
But where's kind of the new thought leadership coming from, you Phil? I mean, are they being raised in today's kind of transit environment, or you think they may come from a different kind of area? I mean, where's kind of the new thought leaders you think coming from to help kind of solve these issues?
What do you think, Davey? Then I'll answer.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. And Paul, I feel like you have a much better handle on that. So why don't you go ahead?
All right, I'll do it. I didn't want to just be the one talking. So it's funny, I just interviewed Andy Lord, right? The executive who's the Transport for London commissioner. He's the head of really the Western world's largest transit system. He spent 20 years at British Airways, 25 years, something like that, and brought so many interesting, transferable leadership skills, et cetera, to our industry. I think that, APTA and ENO and CTAA and so many groups have young leader programs where they're training up young leaders in the industry. One of the things that I find that is true, especially with young people in their 20s and 30s, and I have children that age, is that they are passionate about things and they want a job which isn't just about a paycheck. They want a job that intersects with their interests and their passions. And so many of them are focused on, a cleaner, better environment, a better, brighter tomorrow for everyone. And public transit has the solution to so many of those areas. And so I think that people that are passionate for our industry are streaming in from all sorts of areas, whether it's in the parking, they came out of the parking world, come out of the aviation world, come out of transit, come out of some other industry. Maybe it's tech, high tech. There's a lot of people that, because so much of our industry is tech driven, and I work for a tech company. So it's all those areas. But I think most of the young people that are coming in are not doing it for a paycheck. They're doing it for a better future. They want their job to actually contribute to the world's betterment. And I can't think of a better place for them to put their efforts than in the world of public transit.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll echo Paul's comment. I have the great privilege of working with a lot of 20 and 30 somethings, both in my own company and externally. And they bring so much energy and passion. And I am very hopeful for the future because they will be tomorrow's transit CEOs. They'll be tomorrow's version of Randy Clark and others. And the dedication they bring, the new ideas, innovative thinking, focus on customer service, ease of use. That's where some of the great ideas are coming from and will come from. And so I feel hopeful about the future. And I think the future of transit is in good hands, especially when we look at today's emerging leaders in their 20s and 30s who will go on to positions of top leadership in the years to come.
Right. Well, great. Thanks for taking the time, guys. Paul, how can people get this book?
Well, thanks. The book is available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes and Noble. It's available at sae.com, which is the publisher. You can just Google it and look it up. And we're going to be doing a series of events, Alex, like we always do, around the world. Doing a book launch, international book launch next month in Vienna, Austria. We'll be at the APTA event in Anaheim. Hopefully Davey will be there with me and a bunch of other folks, and we'll be signing the book, giving away copies of it there. Vauntis has already stepped up and said they'll do that. So lots of great ways to interact with the authors. And we're interested in more ideas. And so we appreciate the opportunity to be on your show, Alex, to kind of spread what I call the gospel of transit. It really is, as we mentioned earlier, it really is I don't want to use the word silver bullet, but I can't think of any other term. It's kind of like an anachronism from an older era. But it really does solve so many of society's issues. And it is being buffeted right now, like I said, by so many areas. But coming out of this, we're coming out of it Phoenix-like with all kinds of great ideas that these top leaders in this book talk about. So thank you for the opportunity to share a light on some of these best practices so that we can improve our society.
No, I appreciate your guys' time. Thanks for the conversation.